Bear one another's burdens. This past week we have been confronted with burdens that we are not sure how to share or carry. The act of violence against the Jewish community at the Tree of Life Synagogue makes us wonder where this world is going. The challenge is that stories such as that are becoming all too common. In the same week, we heard news of other intended acts of violence against people gathered for worship. But it's not only that. Around the world, we hear stories of war in Yemen and in Sudan and elsewhere, with suffering that is almost too much to comprehend. And perhaps the weight of it all might cause us to ask, why, God? How are you burdened by this at all? In preparation for this sermon, I was reminded by someone of the events a number of years ago in Oklahoma City and of a memorial that was established for that bombing in 1995. There are 168 chairs, and with each chair there is the name of someone whose life was taken. But it's not that monument. Actually, it's another monument across the street. St. Joseph Catholic Church was also damaged in that event, and they erected a monument at the street corner across from the city monument. And in that, there is a statue of Jesus with these words and the inscription, "And Jesus wept." That verse comes from the story that we just heard from John. Jesus wept. A story that echoes our own questions and wonderings about life. In the gospel story, Jesus makes his way to Mary and Martha. Lazarus, their brother, has died. Jesus came too late to do anything for that. He arrives instead on a scene of grief and wondering. 3 times, the question is asked of Jesus, if you had come just a little bit sooner, maybe you could have done something, healed Lazarus, and he would still be with us. Earlier in the trip, we find, in fact, that Jesus had delayed taking that trip. The King James said he tarried. We're never given an explanation as to why he waited before making his way down to Bethany and Lazarus. The question just sort of hangs there unanswered. He had healed others. Couldn't he have done something for Lazarus? The question is asked, but there is no answer. And perhaps at that point, that story is like a mirror to our own world and experience. We have these questions that are always searching for answers. God, why is there such suffering in the world? Why do things happen as they do? Are you not burdened at all? Today we remember the saints who have gone before us, people of faith who have died. All are missed. But we also know that not every death has the same meaning. Some lived a long life and they were ready to meet their God. Others went too soon and we were not ready to say goodbye. Sometimes the burdens we bear are not easily lifted. Sometimes they are not so quickly dispensed or dismissed. So how does the story of Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus help us to understand the nature of bearing one another's burdens? In the story, Jesus shows up, and his coming has much to tell us about what it means to bear with one another's burdens. When he comes, he does not sort of intrude or overwhelm Mary or Martha, but stands outside, out at the edge of town, and Mary and Martha will go to him, and there will be conversation, and they will share their burdens with Jesus, and he will listen. And then we have this description. When Jesus saw their weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Another translation says simply, he shuddered with sadness. That's more than just simply saying that Jesus had sympathy or that he cared. He shuddered with sadness that their grief and sorrow became his grief and sorrow. And then John goes on to write, and he says this, Jesus said, "Where have you laid Lazarus?" And they said to Jesus, "Lord, come and see." And he began to weep. This is a very different picture of God than what is described by the philosophers, who imagine God as some watchmaker who designed the intricate mechanism of nature and the universe, who set it in motion, but then there is this picture of God retiring to the heavens to watch, impassive, unmoved, maybe even indifferent to our individual and personal plights. We have to remember, that picture is not the God of the Bible. That picture is not the God of the prophets, who is deeply grieved at the fate of the widows and the orphans. It's not the God we come to know in Jesus. For what we learn in this story, especially in the story of John, is that Jesus wept, God wept. We are not alone. On this day, we remember in prayer the saints who have gone before us. And we will read their name, and we will ring the bell, and we will do so and remember Jesus who wept and bore the burden of Mary and Martha in their loss. We are not alone. God is with us, deeply moved. But there's even one more way in which Jesus bears our burdens. It was another preacher who pointed this out to me, Fred Craddock, and he said, I want you to take a closer look at the conversation, what is said in that story. Jesus shudders with that sadness, and then he asks the question, where have you laid Lazarus? And then they say, come and see. Now, that's not the first time we hear those words, come and see. Those words are spoken earlier in the gospel lesson. Philip and Andrew follow Jesus, and they say, where are you staying? And Jesus says, come and see. And they went and stayed with him and became his followers. Nathanael said, what good can come out of Nazareth? And in his skepticism and doubt, Jesus says, come and see. And it was an invitation into faith. There was the woman at the well in the 4th chapter who wrestles with Jesus about her situation of having no one really to care for her, many husbands, and a life that is spinning out of control. She's the one who returns back to the village that had shunned her and said, maybe this is the one. Come and see. So now, Mary invites Jesus to come and see the burial tomb of Lazarus. But what Jesus sees is perhaps something more. He sees not just simply the tomb where Lazarus is put, but he understands what will happen. He sees the tomb that Lazarus will come out. He sees what will be coming. He sees a tomb that will be empty so that it will be ready for him to go in. For we are just a few days from his own arrest. Jesus sees the burden that he will take upon himself, the burden of all the wrong and brokenness in this world that will lead him from betrayal to trial, to cross, to tomb. Jesus sees the tomb and he weeps. It is a Gethsemane moment. For he takes on the burdens of the world and he feels the full weight, and it is almost too much. On this All Saints weekend, we gain a larger view that bearing burdens is ultimately for the sake of lightening loads. Because Jesus bears the burden of our death, we can talk about the promise of life. And we have this picture of the saints with God, now relieved of the burdens of their suffering, at peace and joy around the throne of the Lamb. The enduring picture of this day is not that Jesus wept, but that he lives. Not that Jesus bears the burdens on the cross, but that in the cross our burdens are lifted. Jesus wept so that the saints might sing. What does that mean for us when it comes to bearing one another's burdens as an act of following Christ? I've thought about this as we follow Christ, it is a way in which we I think of it as a stance for those who follow Jesus. A stance to do something more as an act of love and service. That in the face of human need, a willingness to take on the burdens of another person in some way. Perhaps we do that to a greater degree within our own families. We bear the burden of an aging parent and do what we can so that they might remain at home or honor their wishes. The parent bears the burden of love and worry for a child, even as they grow to an adult. The church, it has always been known as a community of people willing to bear the burdens of other people. I think of the ministry of solace servers. It is a team of people who prepare meals at the time of a funeral served on that day. Many will spend 6 to 8 hours on that day preparing and serving and then cleaning up for that meal so that they might relieve the family of the burden of what to do with all these guests on that day. I can think of so many other ministries that happen in this church. But all of them share this common source of energy. Christ bore the burdens for the sake of life. The saints eternal are the sign of that life. And when we bear one another's burdens, whether they be great or even less so, we do them with this full sense of intention. That we bear one another's burdens so that we might follow in the way of Christ who has gone before us. Amen.